Welcome to This Explainer. I am thrilled you're here because today we're going to demystify something that is absolutely essential if you want to truly understand how a business operates. Think about it. Just like people, businesses can look perfectly healthy on the outside. They have a shiny new office, flashy marketing, a charismatic CEO, but secretly, they could be failing internally. Without the right tests, you literally cannot see the warning signs. So today, we are opening up the medical kit to run a full financial health checkup on the numbers. Okay, let's dive into our diagnostic roadmap for today. First, we'll check the vitals. Second, liquidity, surviving the short term. Third, solvency, built for the long haul. Fourth, profitability, the bottom line. And finally, we'll put it all together into your complete diagnostic toolkit. Starting with Part 1, the vitals, diagnosing business health. Now, financial ratios really don't have to be intimidating math. Honestly, just think of them as the x-rays and blood tests of the business world. They move us past those raw, confusing numbers on a balance sheet and give us highly targeted, practical diagnostics. Today, we're going to examine 3 core systems. Liquidity is the pulse of the business, solvency represents the structural bones, and profitability, well, that's the muscle. And the reality is, if any one of these systems fails, the whole organism is in deep trouble. Moving right into Part 2, liquidity, surviving the short term. Before any company can even dream about a massive 5-year growth plan, we have to ask a much more basic question. Can they survive today? Liquidity is that short-term operating cushion required to run daily activities without stalling out. Imagine a busy bakery that suddenly realizes it can't afford flour for tomorrow's bread. That is a critical liquidity failure. If that financial cushion disappears, the heartbeat stops, and day-to-day operations instantly grind to a halt. And it's surprisingly easy to translate this math into plain English. Take working capital, for example. It's simply your current assets minus current liabilities. Or put another way, it's exactly what you own right now minus what you owe right now. A positive number here ensures the company can pay off its near-term debts. Then you have the current ratio, which just divides those exact same 2 numbers to assess your broad capability to cover short-term obligations. But what number are we actually looking for? Well, when checking the current ratio, the healthy target benchmark is between 1.5 and 2.0. This is the sweet spot. If the number drops too low, it signals a serious default risk. The pulse is dangerously faint. But on the flip side, if it's too high, that's actually not great either. It means the company is just hoarding idle cash and assets instead of putting them to work efficiently. Now, let's contrast the current ratio with a slightly more intense diagnostic called the acid test ratio. While the current ratio looks at all your short-term assets, the acid test is a much stricter version. It only looks at quick assets, like cash and receivables, entirely excluding your inventory. Why? Because selling off physical stock takes time. If a massive bill is due tomorrow, you can't exactly sell a warehouse full of products overnight, right? So the absolutely crucial benchmark here is an acid test ratio of 1.0 or greater. A score of 1.0 means the business has enough immediate, highly liquid cash to cover its short-term liabilities without having to desperately fire sell its physical stock overnight just to pay those urgent bills. Still checking the pulse, we also need to know how fast the blood is actually circulating. Accounts receivable turnover measures how fast you collect credit from customers, while inventory turnover tracks how fast you sell and restock your goods. Think of grocery stores. They have massive inventory turnover compared to, say, a luxury car dealer. For both of these metrics, higher is pretty much always better. It keeps your cash from getting trapped in slow-moving goods. Which leads us perfectly into the operating cycle. This simply adds the days it takes to collect cash to the average age of the inventory. Now, unlike those previous ratios where higher is better, for the operating cycle, lower is actually much, much better. You want this cycle to be as short as possible because that means you're buying inventory, turning it into a sale, and converting your operations back into cash incredibly rapidly. Next up is Part 3, solvency, built for the long haul. Okay, so we've confirmed the daily pulse is steady. Now let's examine the structural bones. Solvency evaluates a company's reliance on internal equity versus external debt. Basically, you have to ask yourself, is this business surviving on a sugar rush of borrowed debt, or is it growing on the solid nutrition of its own internal equity? Solvency tests give us that answer. When a bank looks at your business, they immediately check your coverage ratios to calm their nerves. The times interest earned ratio and debt service coverage ratio basically evaluate if your operational cash flow can handle mandatory debt payments without breaking a sweat. You absolutely want these numbers high to reassure lenders that there is no way you're going to default. For the Times Interest Industry Earned Ratio specifically, a score of 2.5 or above is generally preferred. When your operating profits are 2.5 times larger than your interest expenses, it shows a fantastic, reassuring safety buffer that virtually eliminates the risk of defaulting on those interest payments. Beyond just coverage, we have to look at the actual structure of the bones. Here we compare two foundational metrics, the debt ratio versus the equity ratio. The debt ratio measures the exact percentage of your asset base financed by borrowing. The equity ratio measures the percentage funded by the owners. So for strong structural stability, you want that debt ratio to be lower, and you want that internal equity ratio to be higher. As a general rule of thumb, a preferred debt ratio is typically under 50%. If the debt side of your asset pool gets much bigger than half, you are heavily reliant on external borrowing, and that makes the structural bones of the company incredibly brittle if the economy suddenly takes a downturn. Looking at the final leverage ratios, debt to equity, equity to debt, and debt to capitalization, the magic target for debt to equity is typically 1.5 or lower. Hitting this mark proves to creditors that you have a conservative capital layout and a massive equity cushion protecting you from risk. Moving on to part 4, profitability, the bottom line. So, we have a strong pulse, we have solid bones, and now we test the athletic performance, the muscle. Profitability is the capability to squeeze pure net profit out of your sales and asset investments. This is the ultimate test of how well management turns capital into a healthy bottom line. The absolute best way to measure that squeeze is through profit margins. First up is the gross profit margin, which shows what's left after subtracting the direct costs of producing goods. Then we look at the return on sales, or net profit margin, which identifies the pure profit squeezed out of every single dollar generated in sales. For both of these, higher is always better. High margins reflect solid pricing power, brilliant cost control, and excellent overall conversion of revenue into pure profit. Next, we evaluate the returns on investment. Return on assets, or ROA, tracks how efficiently management uses the total asset base to generate income. Return on equity, or ROE, measures the net profit relative to the capital shareholders actually invested. Investors absolutely love seeing high numbers here because it tracks exactly how brilliantly management is growing their capital and productively utilizing the company's equipment and investments. And finally, part 5, your complete diagnostic toolkit. We've completed the checkup, but remember, no single ratio tells the whole story. It's a giant puzzle. You have to look at the pulse, the bones, and the muscle all together. So I want to leave you with this thought. If the business you work for took this exact financial blood test today, what would the numbers really reveal? Would it pass the liquidity pulse test? Are the bones strong enough for the long haul? I really hope this sparks your curiosity to pull up a balance sheet and run the numbers yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.